I immediately just wanted to drop using all of the tools that I was using and start writing everything within React Native.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of React Native Radio. Today on the show we have Jed Watson.
Hey everyone.
Lee Johnson.
How's it going?
Peter Pykarczyk.
Hey everyone.
I'm Nader Dabbit. And our guest today is Brent Vatne. Brent, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Brent Vatne. I work at Exponent. I also work on React Native, just open source. I don't work at Facebook. Yeah, that's pretty much all I could say as an intro.
Yeah, for the 2 or 3 people that might not already know you that listen to the show. Yeah, so our topic today is kind of going to be a general topic. Since we have Brent on here, he knows quite a bit of information, so we're going to kind of just pick his brain here. So we're kind of going to just be calling this a general discussion. So, so I guess starting off, can you kind of give us a quick rundown of how you got involved with React Native?
Sure. So I guess going back to sort of my history in software, my background is primarily in web development. I spent most of my career working at agencies with Ruby on the back end and writing web UIs using the standard tools of the day, whether that was at some point I was using Backbone, jQuery, Angular, and React. But a couple of years ago, I kind of just made the decision I wanted to narrow my focus towards front end and specifically mobile development. So I never really found the idea of doing full native development and learning this fully different platform. So for example, UIKit on iOS, right? Learning all those APIs, learning how to use that really well, and then having to go and learn, the same amount of information in order to be able to write an app on Android. And so I didn't really delve into that a bit, but I never really built anything significant on either platform. I was always exploring what other options were available. And so when React Native was announced, I was in the process of doing a couple of contracts. And I immediately just wanted to drop using all of the tools that I was using and start writing everything with React and React Native. For the web, I was already writing a lot of my projects using React, some of them still on Angular. So at the time I was doing this prototype using Ionic, which, it's a fairly decent tool, but I really ran into a lot of walls in the implementation around gestures or really doing anything beyond displaying kind of static information. So yeah, when it was announced, I just paid very close attention to what was happening there. And the day that it finally was released, I recall was March 26th. So I actually have a 156-day public commit streak from March 22nd to August 24th. And pretty much when it was released, I just dove right in and spent the vast majority of my time doing all sorts of projects related to React Native, converting a client project to React Native, building any libraries that I needed in order to move forward with that project. And really, as well, on top of that, just trying as hard as I could to learn how it works, and at the same time, really alleviate the amount of work that the core team had to do in supporting open source, so that they were able to better concentrate at the time on pushing the framework forward. So that's, I guess, a long answer, but
yeah. So as far as like the whole idea of like not wanting to have to specialize in both Android and iOS, but kind of be able to do cross-platform, I definitely, I think a lot of people are coming from that same, ideology. Just that's one of the many things that kind of make it one of the go-to, or at least right now, like one of the main go-to frameworks for building these type of apps. But what about your involvement with the community? I guess, how did that get going to the where it is now?
It just sort of snowballed. From the start, I've always found it to be a good way to learn, to just trying to answer other people's questions. So given that I wanted to learn as much as I could about React Native when it was released, I was very active in the IRC channel. So this was before even Reactive Flux came up. And so I was just there answering questions. And if anyone asked something that I didn't understand, I would try and go and understand it, and to the best of my ability, answer these questions. And of course, there were things that I just wanted to do that were unrelated to anything else anyone else was asking. And so I would often go ahead and just ask questions myself, and then I would take that and turn it into a blog post or some open source library and share it. And so, yeah, it just sort of snowballed. And at one point, I noticed I was spending a lot of time on the issues as well, answering people's questions there. And I just thought, I could probably be more effective in helping if I was able to close these issues, because it's taking a while. I have to ping someone. They have to be distracted from what they're doing and look at this. So I just asked Christopher, like, hey, do you want me to lend a hand on closing issues? And he was open to the idea. So yeah, that was how that worked. And similarly with the newsletter that I run, I pretty much just asked in the IRC channel if anyone would be interested in seeing a newsletter every week or two. And overall, I think the interest level seemed like pretty decent. I think like 3 or 4 people said yes, which, is a pretty small number, but I thought, all right, that's, I'm collecting all this information anyways. I'm going through all the issues and pull requests and having a look at all the new libraries that come out. So it seems like I might be a good person to just throw that into a list somewhere and send that out each week. So that's sort of how that started as well.
Yeah, I think your newsletter is like the highlight of a lot of our week. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I know that I've said this to you on Twitter before, but that is hands down my favorite newsletter out of all the ones that I'm subscribed to.
Well, that's nice to hear. Yeah, it does. I mean, it takes a decent amount of work each week. But a really nice thing about it is that it really forces me to stay up to date. So some weeks I'll be sort of heads down and previously it was client work, and now work with Exponent. And so I won't get a lot of time to look through the issues and pull requests and whatnot, and what's going on in the community. So every weekend, pretty much, I just go and try and catch up on everything in order to be able to tell everyone else what's going on, and kind of just make sure that I'm up to date with everything that's happening in the community. So it's really good for me as well as it seems like it's good for the community. So
yeah, well, the knock-on effect is that it keeps us up to date, because then we need to read the newsletter.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of people contributing to that newsletter too? Do people submit articles, or do you kind of just take care of that on your own?
I'm kind of surprised that more people don't submit articles. I'll get maybe 1 or 2 submitted each week. And if I actively solicit it, so if I go into Reactive Flux or other channels, then I'll typically get a few links. But yeah, overall, usually not a lot of submissions. I just end up finding them myself.
Cool. That definitely takes a lot of work then, because you have a lot of great content in there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to put together. So until I no longer have 4 or 5 spare hours every weekend, it will continue to be fun, I think.
So React Native is obviously a big part of your community involvement, and the newsletter as well. But there's Exponent as well. Maybe tell us a bit about your involvement in that and how that fits into your big picture.
So so I first heard about Exponent when from James Ide, when it was first released. He sort of direct messaged me on Reactive Flux and asked me to have a look at it and asked what I thought. And I really liked the idea. At the time, I was doing some work on React Native Playground, and it seemed like they were similar at the time, but you could tell that there was a very different vision in terms of what they wanted to do in the long run. And, React Native Playground to me was always this great place to easily set up a shareable sort of snippet of code that someone could go in and look at and determine, whether there's a bug with some certain version, which was why it was important to have that version switcher. And share that very easily in the issues, because I've noticed early on that we would get issue reports, and in order to be able to actually determine if these were problems, we'd have to go in and recreate the issue ourselves, or even if it was a good issue description, we'd have to clone a repository and install the dependencies, and then open up Xcode and compile a project, start the packager and all that. And so it was like a 5 or 10 minute process involved in just testing out a bug So that's sort of what React Native Playground came from, or at least my motivation behind it. I think Josh has a bit of a different vision for it, but I think he's carrying it forward with that right now. As for Exponent, it's more of a platform for kind of, we've started to call them instant apps. So in the same way that, within the Facebook app, you get instant articles where you just click through and it's sort of a native type experience, but at the same time, it's sort of the same content you'd expect to see on the web. And what you would typically click through and see on one of these links through Facebook is a web sort of experience. And so I think it's very, very similar to that sort of idea, except taking it from articles to more sort of interactive and sort of fully functioning type of experiences. Yeah. So that's sort of where that fits in, I think, in the ecosystem. Of course, it uses React Native. It's heavily dependent on React Native, but it just builds on top of it to create this platform that is pretty exciting, I think.
Instant apps is a great term. I love that.
Yeah, and actually, coming up later this week, we will. So at the time of recording, just for context for the listeners, it is Monday, December 7th, and so later this week we will be releasing Exponent for Android. So we're really excited about that. It has, I think, a lot more power than the iOS version, because the iOS version is naturally locked down more by the OS. So we are able to do things like create new document panes, so you can see the instant app that you open by pressing the multitasking button, and it will show up as its own separate tab in multitasking. You can add the icon to the home screen, and so it just appears as if it was any other thing that you could have got, say, through the Play Store.
So how has it been getting Android ready for production, I guess, as opposed to, like, I know iOS has been ready to go or been in production with Exponent for a while. What was the process like there?
Well, I think the reason why it has taken us a while to get Exponent for Android ready is because we also just have a different sort of vision for it at the moment. Like as I was saying, we were able to take advantage of different platform APIs that just don't exist on iOS. And so we want to make sure that we do that right and that we really, I guess, nail the experience out of the gate. I mean, it's not going to be the end all that we come up with, but ultimately we want to have something that's representative of what we think is possible with Exponent. And so it's taken a bit longer because we just have to really, I guess, think more of what's the ultimate sort of realization of this idea. And the Exponent for iOS is a much more simplified version of that at the moment. So I don't think Android itself has necessarily gotten in the way too much of that. There are a few issues related to supporting different versions of Android, but overall, it is more immature, the Android project at the moment for React Native, but it's coming along very quickly, and I don't think it's been a huge issue for us. It's mostly just us working on the product.
Yeah. I just wondered how how tough it was getting that going. I know Android's so new. Like, were you guys working with Facebook? I'm sure you guys were, but I'm just curious to what extent did you guys have information about the Android build, and were you guys able to kind of get it going fairly easily, or was there any big roadblocks and things like that? And also, how much, I guess, Android platform experience, Java, things like that, do the team members at Exponent have to be able to put something like this together?
Okay, so there are a couple of questions there. I'll start from the last one. In-house, we actually didn't have a lot of experience going in specifically related to Android. However, we did have a contractor at the time who has since become a full-time employee who had a significant amount of experience with Android. And he's actually, him and James are primarily building the Exponent Android app. So now, going back to the first part of that, we did have access to React Native Android about a month or two beforehand, I think. So we did get to communicate a bit there about what we thought was important. But I think overall, the stance that we took was we were just advocating for what we thought was good for the community with with React Native Android, and I think overall there wasn't necessarily any advantage or anything like that we had by communicating with some employees at Facebook before. I think that probably the biggest issues that we've run into so far were some very similar to like what the guys at App Hub and I believe it's Code Push have run into. So that was when React Native Android was first released. It didn't support loading bundles from certain sources like within your app assets. So you couldn't just download a bundle and then save it and load in the future from there, which is what is being done with these live update sort of frameworks. So that was definitely an obstacle for us, and thankfully that was resolved. And actually, we didn't even really have to do that much about that. There were a few meetings related to the needs for stakeholders in that area, and ultimately, I think it worked out pretty well. Aside from that, I think we just had the problems that everyone is having. The platform parity isn't there yet, so there are a lot of components that, and increasingly few components that are missing, and APIs that are supported. So that's definitely something that we ran into a few times, especially because we're building an app that is out in production at the moment on iOS, not through Exponent, but we're rebuilding it using React Native and publishing it through Exponent. So it has a lot of things that just weren't sort of built in right away, and so it kind of held us up a bit in building certain areas of the app. But as for building Exponent itself, I think there were mostly very low level sort of technical issues that we ran into, and I think things that most developers wouldn't run into when using React Native.
And has it cleared up since? In terms of, you mentioned that there's increasingly less missing components for Android. For anyone who's sort of assessing the state of React Native today, if they need to build a cross-platform app, how's it going?
I think it's going really well. So this app that I mentioned we're building, fortunately I can't say the name of it at the moment, but we've actually managed to get very good performance out of it at this point. For certain sections of the app, it even performs better on a Nexus 5 than it does on an iPhone 6S. So we're pretty satisfied with that. And overall, I think the app is pretty representative of maybe 80% of the apps out there. And I think React Native Android is capable of delivering a really solid experience on that. So we're pretty optimistic about it at the moment. That said, there are definitely rough edges with Android, and even with iOS at the moment. So I think if people aren't willing to push through that, maybe it's best to hold off for a bit longer.
That's really good news about the performance. Out of curiosity, what kind of area was that in? Is that sort of in animation, in number crunching?
So this area specifically was, there are a couple. One of them was transitioning from sort of a feed view into the view for a specific story. So what you see is like a preview of the story, and then you click through on it and it shows a loading indicator. And then once it has fetched the full story data over the network, it will render that actual story view and then fade out the loading overlay. And so we were able to get it to actually be faster, going from the feed screen to the story screen, as well as inside of the story screen, there is an image gallery. So some of these stories can have images, and when you tap on an image, it will zoom in and open up an image gallery anywhere between 1 and 100 items. And we were able to get that to generally, in most cases, actually work faster than the fully native UIKit version on iOS on a 6S. So that was really nice.
Wow.
So that did involve animations as well. Yeah.
Well, that's a really good tick for me for how React Native Android is coming along. That's great to hear.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily easy to get to that point. We had to do a good amount of performance work, but we're trying where possible to push this back into React Native itself. One thing I was experimenting with recently was I implemented request idle callback on Android, which is, I think, very useful because it allows you to have some sort of runtime insight into the performance of the app. So you're able to schedule work when there's some downtime And that can be pretty useful because you don't, for example, with list views, the render row function on each frame after the initial page size, it will just render a row regardless of what is happening in the system at the time. So if you're able to throttle the render row so that it only executes if you have, let's say, more than 10 milliseconds left on the frame, then that's a good way to ensure that your app is more responsive. And yeah, so that's kind of an avenue that we're going down right now. And just kind of taking into account the multi-threaded nature of React Native. So if you know someone is going to be scrolling through a scroll view, you can probably do some work on the JavaScript thread at the same time because it's not going to interfere with any of those interactions unless you do something that will actually impact the native frame rate.
Great. That's very insightful. So I guess carrying that thread forward then, in terms of where React Native is headed, maybe if you can tell us a bit about what you found good, what you have had trouble with, and the direction that it's going in, to sort of address this. Like, what are the current topics in terms of core development?
Sure. So reaching feature parity on Android, I think, is really important. That's being prioritized right now in terms of the open source work being done. There is also a lot of work being done internally at Facebook for just improving the speed and memory usage and all the various metrics that are very important when you're integrating React Native into a large app like the Facebook main app that carries with this integration, potential business value. So if it doesn't perform very well, maybe the engagement numbers will go down. Whereas if it performs better, you might get better engagement. So it's really important to at least have the same standard of performance. And that's really exciting, the kind of stuff that's being done there right now. You see probably a new commit every day going into React Native that's related to some sort of optimization, whether it's lazy loading of modules or allowing partial batch applications. There's really, a lot of interesting stuff happening there. Another one that I think is really important, I don't know when it's going to happen, and it's been mentioned before, even on this podcast, is performing animations without having to hit the JavaScript thread on every frame. I think that's an important feature that we need to see soon. Maybe not, within the next few months, but it would be nice to have sometime in the next year or so. I know that we've recently taken a few steps ourselves, and we're having a crack at the problem, at least on a smaller scale. So we might at Exponent have something in the next few weeks that we can push out related to that, but it doesn't solve the entire problem. That's, I think, very important for sure. And then another area is sort of related to what I've been investigating, or rather what I was investigating last week with request idle callback. I think it will be really neat to have different features like this brought into the framework. So, you just have more tools to allow you to control your app's performance. And there's a lot of stuff being built right now as well for improving the ability to profile and understand the performance characteristics of your app. And I think what goes along with that is having tools like request idle callback that allow you to then change the behavior in order to respond to what you're seeing in the profile. I guess one last thing worth mentioning that I think is really neat is the React Native desktop repo that's a fork of React Native itself. A guy named Dima, who on GitHub is PTMT. He's doing some really interesting stuff there. He's steadily pushing along and implementing more of React Native for OS X. And I actually had a look at the repo today, and the UI Explorer example is really impressive. And I think that'll be cool to see where that ends up. Yeah, those are, I guess, the main things.
Wow, that's exciting for sure.
Yeah,
that seems like one of those, surely it was going to happen. But then when it's actually happening, it's really cool. And then on the other side, we've got it pushing in the other direction as well with React Native Web, which I think is, I don't know what your thoughts on this, and I'd be interested to hear them. But someone popped up on Reactiflux yesterday in the Touchstone channel, sort of asking about whether there was any plans with us for Touchstone to, bridge that to React Native, and how that could work, where you've got an app that you could run in Cordova, say for if you were targeting a Windows phone, but then, being able to reuse code across to React Native for iOS and Android. And I sort of thought maybe you could get React Native Web happening as a layer in between that, where you could almost end up running React Native apps on the desktop and mobile and the web.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I'm not doing much work in that area myself, so I don't know. I can't really say much about it, but that definitely sounds like an interesting solution. I guess ideally, I would like to see Microsoft just jump in and implement React Native for Windows Phone, but who knows if that's going to happen. So,
I mean, they're probably working on it.
They've been doing some amazing open source lately. So
yeah.
Including Code Push, actually. That I only realized that was a thing this last week, and looked at it. I was like, I have been waiting for this. That looks great.
It's been great, and Nat and I actually had a chat with some of those guys last week, and they're just polling us developers. What do you want to see? Some really cool stuff going on. Really, I've gotten to where I use Visual Studio Code on a regular basis now.
That's pretty cool. I just switched to Outlook for iOS today. That was a big move for me.
The people I know that use it love it.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Did you move over for like work, or did you kind of move it over for yourself, or what happened there?
Well, so Mailbox was sunsetted today. Mailbox and Carousel from Dropbox. The only feature that I'm missing from Outlook is I really wish they had swipe more to schedule or delete. Because the nice thing about Mailbox was I could swipe and archive, or I could keep swiping to delete. And with Outlook, it's one or the other. You could only swipe or archive, and then you have to click into the email to have it schedule for a later date.
Yeah, I did read about that today, actually.
Google Inbox works pretty well, so it's my choice there.
I use Mail. It's terrible. It's the worst, but
You're so generic, Jed.
I know.
But so Brent, so in terms of what you work or what you do at Exponent, are you guys at parity for Android and iOS, or is it more iOS driven right now? And how do you decide what is going to have precedence?
Well, right now we're focusing most of our efforts on Android. I think that going forward, at least in the short term, we have a more compelling offering on Android, and as well, with the app that we're building, I think we have a lot of potential to attract a lot of users to it. And so that's sort of our primary focus at the moment. It's hard to say how that will change in the future. I mean, iOS is definitely an important platform, and the whole cross-platform nature of Exponent is, of course, really important as well. It's just unfortunate that we don't have the same level of API access that we get on Android, because I think the app could be much better if we did.
Yeah, that kind of just makes me think now with what is happening, because iOS is so limited compared to Android. I wonder if we'll have some much cooler React Native apps in the future built on Android that we can't get on iOS.
Yeah, it's possible. Exponent could be one of them. I mean, you can get it on iOS, but definitely it's still a good experience. It's just not the same quality where when you open up an experience in Exponent on Android, when it opens up in a separate task in the multitasker, and you can add the icon to your home screen, that's just totally different from having to go into Exponent and click on the thing manually from there. Or potentially another workaround we could do is save it as a shortcut through a web URL, but that opens up a browser beforehand. And so it's just not that clean on iOS compared to what you can do on Android.
Can you add native modules on the fly for Android? Do you have a little more wiggle room there compared to iOS?
I'm not entirely sure about that. I haven't really looked into that much. And that's something that we haven't totally got into yet at Exponent. We're focusing on building out this base app, and then we're definitely in the near future going to be picking out sort of what we think are the highest quality native modules. And if there aren't any that are out there that we think are up to the standard that we need for Exponent, we'll just have to probably write them ourselves. And so I think for our case, at least, it would be cool if you're able to dynamically add something like that. I don't think that would be possible, though. And what we're trying to do more is kind of curate the list of modules available. And, we want to have we want to give people as much access to these native APIs as possible. So there should be sort of in the long term, everything that you would need in most cases to build a good experience.
You've kind of just answered this, but maybe like future plans for Exponent. What's your big picture? Where do you want to see it go?
I mean, I could talk about several years in the future. I mean, it would be amazing if Exponent was just on everybody's phone and it shipped with it, right? That would be awesome. But of course, that's streaming to an extent. So I would just like to have a bunch of people making really useful, interesting experiences and distributing them through Exponent, and hopefully have just a nice way to access a lot of these things that we typically right now consume through the web, through some sort of lighter weight platform like Exponent, where you don't have to download a separate app for everything, and you don't have to go through that whole process and keep it updated and whatnot. I mean, there are a lot of other possibilities there as well, and this could potentially tail off into a pretty long discussion. So I'll just leave it at that for now. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can do when you take what I think are the best of native mobile and the best of web and push them together. So there's what I said, and I guess the rest you can kind of probably imagine it if you think about it.
Are you worried about running afoul of the App Store policies?
Sure.
I mean, like there's this loophole that we all live very happily in at the moment, where if you're updating or live pushing JavaScript code and HTML and you're not changing the native code that's running, then you don't have to go through the App Store review process. But one of the limitations on that is that you can't fundamentally change the nature of the app. I think the example given on the code push repo is you shouldn't ship a news app and then turn it into a first-person shooter. And there's certainly if I wanted to push an app out that didn't abide by the App Store guidelines, then I could probably ship it on Exponent. And has that sort of come up much? Is that something you're worried about, or do you have any ideas on how to deal with that? Or
it's definitely something we're aware of. It's a tricky one, right? Like there's not too much we can do about it. We have this vision for how we want things to be, and there might be these policies in place that could prevent us from getting there. But I mean, all we can really try and do, I think, is try to avoid, when possible, doing anything that is, I mean, not even when possible, ideally just adhere to all of the requirements for the App Store. I mean, the wording is pretty vague on there. If you think of it as, for example, like Chrome downloads things that fundamentally change the nature of Chrome as an app, right? You can go to a news site and you can go to a first-person shooter within Chrome. So as the web also becomes more powerful, I think, I don't know if that'll be necessarily a huge concern, but that remains to be seen. I think maybe where that could potentially become a problem is when money starts to get involved. And at the moment, there really isn't any of that in Exponent. And I don't know if that'll be an issue until then, but that is yet to be seen.
Yeah. Is that something on your roadmap?
I don't actually concern myself too much with the sort of business side of the product roadmap. So that's something that Charlie would be able to tell you a lot more about. But I'm not exactly sure what his plan is around that.
I definitely see the whole distinction of the Web 5.0 or next gen web kind of mentality because it is a JavaScript bundle, so that actually does apply. And Apple doesn't pull Chrome or cancel Safari because of the websites you go to, and there are tons of bad ones out there.
Sure, yeah.
But from that perspective, and that it does follow the rules, which are something web based only, which is the bundle file. I think it's a really cool way to do something better than web technology. But I was curious. I mean, that's kind of where you guys are headed. But I was a big fan of and user of TestFlight from the beginning, and I can see a whole other segment of use for this and just that arena alone. I used to work for a ginormous consulting firm distributing builds, especially mobile builds, to your project managers and all the people involved. It was just a pain. Test Flight made it better, but it didn't fix it. But something like Exponent, it makes it almost just one click. I mean, it's super simple.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. It is one click. It's not even almost. It's exactly the number of clicks. Yeah, I totally agree. That's definitely another area where it's very useful. I think there's a broad set of applications for something like this. So an example of where that could be useful is like what you're saying in consultancies when you want to share the code that you're working on very quickly with other people, whether that's a stakeholder or other developers who are working on the same project. So I think there are a lot of other benefits there as well. It's just when you're able to get to the point with your software where you can, I guess, share it immediately with anybody. I think that's really powerful, and that is one of the things that I mentioned before about combining the power of fully native with web. And this is an area where web, it's just always been like that, right? You take index.html and drag it over to your FTP server, and next thing you know, someone from wherever other side of the world can access it, and that's something that we think is really important, and that is definitely sort of a fundamental aspect of Exponent. And we use that on a daily basis for actually doing development as well. I'll be working on an app within Exponent or Exponent itself, and I can just point people to what I'm working on, and they can hop on and have a look and give me feedback right away. I can adjust it, and then they respond accordingly. It's really nice. Yeah, it's definitely a much better experience. And I mean, like I said, I didn't do a lot of native mobile work before, so this is just something that I've always sort of taken for granted. And so when I ran up against not being able to do this, even when I first started with React Native, of shipping things through Test Flight, that was definitely a frustrating experience. So you can get held up on Test Flight for several hours just trying to share a new build with your team, and I think Exponent is a great solution for something like that, where you can just get it in front of your team or the stakeholders in one click.
Yeah, I can definitely see the sharing of apps and new web, because it's a more involved native style of coding, so the experiences are richer just because by nature of how it works. How awesome would it be for people just to share those openly like they do web now? So cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to go back to sort of React more generally, Brent, I can't believe I didn't fanboy out on you the minute you got on this call, actually, because ReactConf is coming up.
Sure.
It's been announced for February, and you're involved in organizing it.
Yeah, I was really lucky. So I messaged Christopher on Facebook Messenger a while ago, and asked him if he thought it might be worth me doing a talk about React Native at React Europe. And his response was, "Oh, I have a better idea. Why don't you help me organize ReactConf?" And I was like, "Wow, that sounds like a good idea." So yeah, I've pretty much just been helping out with a lot of administrative stuff. Like, I'm sure if anyone has put on a conference before, you would have an understanding of it. But really, if you've just organized an event or anything like that, it's I'm very glad that I don't have to do anything related to the financial aspect or getting the venue organized. There are some really smart people at Facebook who are taking care of all that. So Christopher and I just organized the call for presenters. We put the website together, try and plan the event to make it as enjoyable as possible, and reach out to people that we think are really interesting and ask them to give a talk. And so if I haven't reached out to you yet, that doesn't mean that you're not interesting. It's just that maybe I haven't got around to it yet. But please reach out to me and submit a proposal, because that would be fantastic. We're pretty open to topics to be covered in the conference. I think what we're really interested in seeing are talks that are I think, first of all, they have to be entertaining, right? If someone goes up and talks for half an hour and they're not entertaining, it's going to be really difficult for anybody to pay attention. So that doesn't mean you have to be like a professional entertainer, obviously, but try and plan your talk in a way that at least it's not boring. And of course, the information has to be something that is relevant to front-end developers. So that doesn't mean it has to be a talk about React specifically, but something that the audience, so an audience of React developers would be able to take and put into their work, or maybe allow them to see things in a different way that, would give them some sort of insight and hopefully make them a better developer for having heard it. And like ultimately what we want is for people to go and enjoy every talk that they see. Of course, that's maybe a very high aim, but it's something that we're trying to achieve. And so part of the strategy this year for that was we are having 2 slots reserved for lightning talks. I think those are a really fun way to allow a greater degree of participation from the community, because we only have so many regular speaker slots. So we're able to fit in a lot more in those 2 lightning talk slots. And as well, sort of break up the flow of, half hour talk, break, half hour talk, lunch, etc. If instead we get these lightning talks in there, I think that's a nice way to break that up and sort of keep it interesting. So it's a great experience so far. I've really been enjoying it. And I really strongly encourage everyone to submit a proposal. It's going to be, I think, it won't be easy to get a ticket. I think there's a good amount of demand for it. There are a lot of tickets, but I think there's also a lot of demand. So I would highly encourage you to submit at least a lightning talk proposal, because I think everyone has something that they can save or talk about for 5 minutes that would be very interesting. So I don't think that it's possible as a developer to not have that much in you. So think about it.
How is this year's React Conf going to be different from last year?
Well, it won't be in the Facebook headquarters this year. So it'll be larger. I believe last year was 300 tickets. And this year is 400. So 100 more people. It's going to be in downtown San Francisco. We haven't publicly announced the venue yet, but that should be sometime in the next couple of days. Yeah, I think that's primarily, those are the differences. One thing I'm really excited about as well is the diversity scholarship program, which last year there were 10 people involved in that. And this year, I believe it's 40. So these are people who are underrepresented in the industry, who get a chance to participate in this conference and have their ticket paid for and their accommodations paid for. And this is all covered by Facebook. So it's a really nice gesture, I think. And I think that will make the conference that much more interesting to have the diverse set of perspectives represented.
That's fantastic.
Cool.
I saw that there was a diversity scholarship, but I didn't realize there were 40 tickets involved in that. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's a really big effort. That's amazing.
So do you get oh man,
Of course that happened.
Jinx. Go ahead. My question
first.
wasn't as good as yours.
No, my question was going to be a silly one to break the silence. It was going to be, so do you get a free ticket if you speak at a lightning talk?
Oh yeah, you do. Yeah. So
nice. That's actually exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think I have this suspicion that there are going to be so many hundreds of thousands of developers going for the tickets that you probably have a better chance, like in ratio terms, if you submit a lightning talk, because there'll be probably hundreds of those for 5 tickets and 100,000 people going for like the remaining 300 or so, general release tickets.
Yeah, so there are 10 lightning talk tickets available. And so if you actually go to the forum, you'll see as well that if your talk is selected, then you also have the right to purchase a ticket for a friend. So you don't have to go alone if none of your coworkers or friends are unable to get a ticket through the standard purchase process. So really, it sort of entitles you to 2 tickets, which is quite nice.
I'm a huge fan as well of the way you've organized releasing the tickets across all the time zones. That was really, like, for someone in Sydney last year, it was really tricky to try and actually get a ticket just because, they sort of went online in San Francisco time, and you guys have fixed that this year, which is great.
Sure. Yeah. That's definitely important. I mean, we know that people use React all across the world, whether it's Vancouver or are you from Sydney, Jed?
Yeah.
Or
Sydney.
Sydney. So there you go. Opposite sides of the world. So, just distributing it so that everyone gets an opportunity, I think is pretty important.
So getting back to React Native, I have a question. I see you guys have pretty much bet really heavily on React Native with Exponent. I'm curious what your views are in the grand scope of things, like where you see React Native in general heading as far as, I guess, number of people using it and the growth around React Native.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So if you have a look at some of the metrics you could look at to think about sort of how the growth has been doing recently is maybe how many apps are we getting submitted to the showcase? How many plugins do we have submitted to React Parts? We could look at the issue count. I don't know if that's a nice metric to see, but there's certainly a lot of activity there. So I think going forward, I'm very optimistic about it. It's possible that it won't work out. It's entirely possible. Anytime you have a technology that is as ambitious as React Native is, there's a significant risk of something occurring. And so, that said, I think that this general approach is very good. And so whether it's React Native that succeeds or some other similar tool, I think it's the way forward. So I'm pretty optimistic, and at the moment I think React Native is the best out of the this type of tool. So
yeah, and the great thing about it is being open source with a big community. It can live on no matter what, right? It's totally up to us, and so maybe you can also touch on that a little bit and how.
Sure.
How to get involved and what's the best way to start, and because this, it really is. It's not just a Facebook thing. They've turned it over to us, the developers, and it's up to us to make it better and us to help.
Sure. So, I mean, I agree with you. However, I think Facebook plays an extremely important role here. Where if Facebook were to stop using React Native, I think at the current state, probably React Native would die. There's just the vast majority of the work being put into it. There are a lot of people working at React Native in Facebook right now and using it internally. And so I don't think it's something that maybe the community is able to organize around at this phase in the life of the project. I'm really glad that we have a company like Facebook pushing it forward for sure. As for getting started with contributing, so there are a couple of tips. So first, I guess a higher level sort of tip is you really have to have fun with it. If you see contributing as being this task that is on your to-do list that you need to do, you're probably not going to do it because nobody's paying you to do it. And, you can always find something else to do with your time. So you have to go into it. And what I like to do is just find a problem that actually interests me, whether that's something that I've run into in my own work or something that somebody else has stumbled across that's interesting. Then I just sort of like to get a deep understanding of why that problem exists. So I'll read through the code, come up with sort of experiments to try and understand the behavior and try those experiments out, test my assumptions about how it works. Ask people if you have questions about how something works and explain how you got to the understanding that you have at the moment. And so that's sort of my approach to it. It might sound a little bit intimidating, but remember the first thing is just have fun with it, right? There are a lot of things that people can do. So if you look at the issues for React Native, we try to tag issues with good first task when they're very well defined and anyone can just jump on and sit down and spend a day or two and take it from start to finish. And it's maybe not all the implementation details are straightforward, but we tag it with good first task when we know that some specific thing needs to be done, maybe not necessarily how it needs to be done. So there's still room there for some creativity and exploration. So I think that's the most important thing. I mean, for me, when React Native came out, I was just so excited to play with it and find out how it worked. I mean, to me, it was fascinating that you're able to write this code in the same way that you do in the browser and have it actually create these native views and be able to manipulate them with this extent of performance and whatnot. So like, I just I wanted to understand how it works. And still, I mean, I spent a lot of time last week digging into the lower level details of Android, trying to understand exactly what's going on with the JNI interface and sort of be able to follow the flow from getting the app running to sending over the subsequent updates, just sort of like end-to-end sort of understanding of that. And it's really rewarding, I think. So if you do that and you look into these problems and try and get an understanding, I think contribution sort of just comes naturally from that. So, yeah, it's kind of a long answer.
So speaking of contributing to React Native, you're one of the few people outside Facebook that actually is a core contributor. What's that experience like for you?
It's the best. It's amazing. So I'm not really interested in moving from Vancouver right now. I really like it here. So, working at Facebook is off the table. So contributing to React Native, it really gives me a chance to work with a lot of engineers that I really respect and that I otherwise wouldn't really have the opportunity to collaborate with. And so this includes people really even from outside of Facebook. So like James Ide and Charlie Cheever, who I work with at Exponent now, I met them through contributing to React Native. As you know, you've probably seen James all around the React Native repo. He is by far the most prolific commenter on issues and pull requests. So I'm sure people have come across his name before. But yeah, I mean, to be totally honest as well, it's really nice that it gives me some kind of credibility. I mean, if I wasn't a contributor on React Native, if that hadn't come to happen however many months ago, I don't know how interested you guys would have been in talking to me right now. And I don't know how many conferences and meetups would be as enthusiastic as they are to have me speak there. So it's really nice to have these kind of opportunities. And I mean, really, it's just, I enjoy working with React Native a lot. It's like I haven't reached such a high level of satisfaction with my career at any other point. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
You can't see me right now, but I'm giving you thumbs up. That sounds great.
I can imagine it. Yeah.
I think we're going to probably have to wrap it up here in the next maybe 5 to 10 minutes if you guys want to think about anything else we want to go over.
I feel like every time it goes quiet, you can hear the brains ticking.
When we get off the call, we're going to think of like 50 things to ask him.
Yeah, if no one else had anything, I did have a question for something you mentioned earlier. Okay. About migrating apps. You said you guys are doing that a lot. If you wanted to share some of your experiences with that, just kind of, I think you maybe mentioned Backbone, but just migrating apps with different technologies to React Native, because I think that's something that a lot of people could get into when they're starting out.
Well, so we're not exactly migrating apps from other JavaScript tools to React Native. What we're doing is we're taking an existing iOS app and basically just rebuilding it within React Native. And I mean, at the same time that we're doing this, they are continuing with development for this app. And, they release new updates every couple of weeks. And we just do our best to maintain parity while also, with the new features rather, while also catching up with everything else that we need to implement. And so I don't know if it's so much, is that sort of what you had in mind, or?
Yeah, I just didn't know. I knew you guys were migrating, or I didn't realize it was a moving target and that it was in a native app.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, though, because they'll make these changes to the native app, and we're able to, within a day or two, just catch up to whatever changes they've made. It really doesn't take that long. I think we can thank React Native for that velocity that we get. So that's something that, going forward, we'll probably be supporting this for a while. And so we're really glad that we're able to have such a fast development speed in order to keep up with these changes.
So for anyone who's thinking about getting into React Native instead of already using it, what have you got to say? I mean, obviously it's you mentioned before, it's been the highlight of your career working on it, but for someone looking to adopt it, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the project that you want to use it for. I think it's in a very good state right now, and it's getting better by the day. And as long as you're willing to, work through the occasional issue that you come across, you're probably going to have a good time using it. If you don't agree with the React code aesthetic overall, if you aren't into functional programming, you might not like it very much. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth at least checking out. And so I recently did a talk at a meetup where I looked at similar tools and just tried to find the best apps that each of those tools had released. And I think that already in, what is it, like 9 months or whatever it's been since React Native was released, already it has better apps than any of the comparable tools that use JavaScript to power the app. And so I'm, from that point of view, if that's something that you're wanting to do, I think that React Native is the only tool that's proven to be able to deliver the high quality of experience while still being powered by JavaScript. There are some very promising alternatives coming up, like NativeScript. So I couldn't find any apps that were made with it yet that compare to even sort of the average React Native app at the moment. I can see how the technology would certainly allow people to build something very good, and especially with the integration with Angular that's coming up, that's definitely also promising. So yeah, I mean, just give it a try, and if you like the feel of it, and if you use React on the web, especially, I mean, I don't even have to sell it to you; it's pretty straightforward. But just give it a try. If you like it, that's great. If you run into some issues, let me know, and I'll try and help you through them. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun, so play with it. That's really all I can say about that.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Jed, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so I've got 2 this week. One came from the podcasting experience, and I'm going to give a shout out to Zencastr. It's zencastr.com, which is what we're using to record this episode, and it's a great thing because Skype failed on us terribly several times during the recording. So Zencastr records everyone's voice independently and then gives everyone a local download for a backup and can put all the sort of independent channels into a Dropbox. And if you're podcasting and you haven't found it and you're just using Skype, then check that out because it will probably save you an episode or 2. And the other one that I wanted to give a pick to is a new library called Enzyme by Airbnb. And this is their take on JavaScript testing utilities for React. And it looks really cool. It's very new, but it's already got a ton of stars. And it's basically, it mimics jQuery's API for DOM manipulation and traversal, which makes it very easy to think about how you're writing tests, which, can be one of the more challenging things when you're approaching testing React components. So I think that looks great, and check it out.
Awesome. Peter, would you like to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So an interesting library that I've just started using is called React Resolver. It's a declarative way to get data back. Basically, all you do is you list an endpoint, and then you list what you want that object to live under state, and it just takes care of everything else for you. It's pretty cool. We'll see how it works out.
Okay, great. Lee, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I think my pick this week is a film called Racing Extinction that aired on Discovery this week. It's a really great film about just our climate changes and animal extinction and what we can do to help. So check it out.
Okay, Brent, do you have any picks?
Sure, yeah. So my first pick would be React Native Radio. I think that it's really awesome that you guys are doing this show. So hat tip to you. In addition to that, I think ReactConf 2016, I mean, it's going to be a good time. So I would highly recommend, again, for people to submit proposals. It's going to be hard to get a ticket. So definitely try out a lightning talk. I think that's
I support it too.
Yeah, definitely +1 on the ReactConf. My pick is going to be East of Eden. It's a book that I've been reading by John Steinbeck. It's about 600 and something pages long. It's a lot longer than I normally like, but it's been really, really good book so far. So if anyone needs something to add to their list, East of Eden. All right. Well, Brent, thank you so much for coming on the show. We've been wanting to have you on, so this has been a real pleasure.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks, everyone, for listening to episode 11 of React Native Radio. We'll see everyone next week.